Over the last few weeks, Tom, we've talked quite a bit about the Wizard of Oz. We've been talking about sort of the man behind the curtain.
Yep.
But I want to pretend for just a minute.
By the way, I have to add this, Dave, as a quick interjection. I saw it not too long ago.
Yeah.
And for those who have not seen it, watch it again or watch it. It really holds up well. And here's what's amazing. The Wizard of Oz was the first color movie. Did you know that?
Yes, I
First
did.
movie that came out in color. I think it was the 30s, if I remember right.
I don't know the year.
Either 30s or early 40s. Anyway, it still holds up, and there's fun, and there's frivolity, and there's some real creepiness in there. The witch and the flying monkeys.
Flying monkeys
there's some dark, creepy stuff in the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to ask you to pretend for just a minute that I actually have all of the powers that the Wizard of Oz claims to have.
All right.
I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to use these powers. It's perfect. It was your birthday last weekend.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give you a gift.
Okay.
I'm going to give you the one thing I know you've always wanted. And everybody's thinking, what is this?
Yeah.
Right?
I'm thinking, what is this?
I'm going to make you the owner of the New York Yankees.
Oh, great. Excellent. I would love that. Yes.
You are the new owner of the New York Yankees.
Yep.
You've got the $2 billion a year revenue coming in from the YES Network.
Yep.
You are...
Can I hire Derek Jeter again?
If he'll leave Miami. I don't know many people who are going from Florida to Miami or from Florida to New York again.
That's true.
He sort of set the trend on heading south.
Yep.
So I made you the owner of the New York Yankees.
Okay.
And now you're putting a team together.
Okay. I'm getting rid of Gary Sanchez.
Okay. But you're keeping DJ LeMahieu. I guarantee that.
I'm keeping DJ. Absolutely.
So you're now the owner of the Yankees.
Yep.
And you're putting your team together. What kind of players are you looking for? You're looking for the guy who is the five-tool player, right? For those who don't know the sports reference, it's the guy who can hit, who can run, who can throw, who can do everything on the field, right? Mm-hmm. Are you looking for the five-tool player, or are you looking for the nice guy? Are you looking for the guy that goes to church every Sunday and everybody cares about?
I see where you're going with this.
And it doesn't mean that the five-tool player is necessarily has to be a bad guy,
right?
And it doesn't mean that the guy who goes to church every weekend isn't a five-tool player, right? You're going to have both. But what happens when you find that guy,
the five-tool player who tells off-color jokes, who says jokes that he shouldn't say in polite public company,
who has a little bit of Mickey Mantle in him, likes to go out and likes to date a lot, has a little bit of Babe Ruth in him, likes to go out and smoke cigars and hang out with women, and which player do you want?
I want the players who have all the tools and the demeanor to get along with the rest of the team, right? Be part of the team and all the talents and skills and can hit and throw and run and do all the things that a good baseball player needs to do. That's who I want. I don't really care how many girlfriends he has.
Right.
As long as he's getting enough sleep and he's showing up, for practices and games and doing what he's being paid to do.
As opposed to Allen Iverson, who says we're talking about practice, right? who doesn't come to practice, who doesn't want to participate, who doesn't want to be a part of the team. There's a reason the guy never won a championship.
Yep.
Right? So there is a bit of understanding about what their content is, what their character is like, what the content of their character is in that aspect. But there's still this aspect. You want the best players on your team.
Yep. I want the best.
Baseball is still a merit-based sport. Baseball is still you're still evaluated on wins and losses. Mm-hmm. And the Yankees are still the benchmark because they've got 27 world championships.
I want to be what Branch Rickey was when he hired Jackie Robinson, because think of then at that time there was this powerful wave of racism and white supremacy, and many white baseball team owners saw skin color as the equivalent of someone who doesn't go to church or says bawdy jokes, or it was a character defect. And Branch Rickey said, I want someone who can play baseball really well. And this guy, Jackie Robinson, he's really good. He's got the five tools. We want him.
The other example, Art Modell.
Yeah.
Right? Art Modell, the Cleveland Browns, signing guys like Ernie Davis.
Yeah.
Right? The Redskins have a chance to have Ernie Davis, and we can't do that in Washington, D.C.
Right.
So we're going to trade him to the Cleveland Browns.
Yep. I want the best players who are going to do what they're supposed to do.
Right.
On the field.
Okay, so let's take this into an American context for a minute.
Okay.
The founders. Mm-hmm. Founders weren't angels. We've talked about this before. They philandered on occasion. They didn't go to church every weekend.
Yep.
They didn't do all the things right. Some even owned slaves.
Yeah, some owned slaves. Yeah.
Some of our founders actually owned slaves.
Yeah, and some not only didn't go to church, some were openly skeptical of religion.
Right. Mm-hmm. But you've made the argument that they were the perfect team.
Yeah.
Right? That each one of them brought something to the table that made them that perfect team.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of our listeners have ever actually heard that analogy. I would actually say go into it a little bit if you're willing to.
Well, what's fascinating about I really started to think about this when I was out in California. This is after 9/11. 2 years later, 2003, is when the United States invaded Iraq. Mm-hmm. And the president of the United States at that time was George W. Bush. And he was shifting, he was changing the goals of his foreign policy. Initially, right after 9/11, it was, let's track down the individuals who did this and bring them to justice. That was his stated first goal of his foreign policy. Then it changed to, let's spread democracy in dangerous parts of the world because they'll become less dangerous.
Well, you know what's really funny about that? And it's not even just the dangerous parts of the world. He was trying to spread American democracy to all parts of the world.
Right.
And that exact same time you're doing that, late 2003, maybe it was even, for me, it was early 2004. Mm-hmm. I was walking through a small village in Germany, and I find this guy, right? I see an American, God bless America, land of the free, home of the brave. I find a German beer stein.
That's awesome.
In 2003.
Yeah.
I bet you nothing like this appeared anywhere.
Yeah.
In 1998, in 1997. And then all of a sudden, George Bush is saying, we're going to spread the ideas of American democracy throughout the world. And in a German beer stein.
And by the way, someday I want to drink beer out of that because it's a beautiful beer stein. And we have some listeners right now who are cringing because you and I are talking about democracy. And yes, Dave and I really do understand the difference between a democracy and a republic. But this was George Bush's. This is what he said in public. He said, we want to spread democracy around the world and especially to those dangerous places to make them less dangerous, starting with Iraq. Right. And so I was working on my dissertation at the time. I had finished all my coursework for my PhD in American politics and political science. And I remember sort of comparing the situation in Iraq and other Middle East countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and thinking to myself, where are their founders? Because in the case of America, the revolutionaries who launched this country barely did it. They were very nearly crushed numerous times, and not just from a military point of view. They had all kinds of obstacles and challenges, not least of which was even those who agreed to throw off the British had no agreement on what would replace it. What would come next? Nobody really had a clear answer, or certainly not an answer that was widely agreed upon. They knew there would be some kind of self-governing regime, but what would that look like exactly? Nobody knew.
I think that's an important clarification that I always wonder, maybe it's just widely known and I don't realize it is, or maybe our listeners, our members don't actually realize. When I was growing up, they talked about the Revolutionary War as starting with the Declaration of Independence. And this is sort of one of those issues with education and the idea that a lot of our educators, our teachers, have master's degree in education rather than the topic that they're teaching.
Right.
You get thrown into, you're going to teach history this semester, or you're going to teach English this semester.
And coach the football team at the same time, right?
Or we're hiring you to coach the football team, but in the meantime,
go teach civics.
little side note on that. My stepdad still substitute teaches, and he was a phys ed teacher in Denver Public Schools and was a high school baseball coach.
Okay,
right. So he was all sports all the time.
Yeah.
he got called in. This was actually pre-COVID, but he got called in at one point to substitute in a Latin class.
Oh, wow. Did he take it?
He did. He actually showed up and substitute taught a Latin class. But that says worlds about our education system right now, right? That you don't need to know Latin to teach Latin.
Right.
I did just say that.
I'm actually surprised. So Latin was being taught this was a public school?
Yeah. It was a charter school.
It
was a DPS charter school.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And he often ended up in some of the charter schools.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was asked to teach a Latin class.
Well, I don't know if we'll get back to this. I actually have some thoughts on teaching Latin, students learning Latin. I strongly encourage it, starting at the youngest age.
Sure.
3, 4 years old, 5 years, as young as possible.
We'll just go back to last week's podcast. We'll understand why you believe
that's right.
that.
We might circle back to that, but I'm not going to guarantee it. But if we go back and look at that cast of revolutionaries, and your point is absolutely true. The actual fighting, physical fighting, the hot war with the British Empire had been waged for more than a year when the Declaration of Independence is signed in July of 1776. That begins in April of 75, right? You have to go back to the prior year, that spring, Lexington, Concord, all that, Paul Revere. And in fact, throughout the summer of 75 into that terrible winter, and Washington loses a lot of soldiers just from starvation and freezing. I mean, that winter of December of 75, early months of 76 was brutal. And all through that period, George Washington was an Englishman. Mm-hmm. He thought of himself as an Englishman. When he would meet with his generals, part of the Continental Army, you know how they opened their meeting? They would toast the king.
Right.
They would reaffirm their elite. What they were fighting for was a redress of their grievances. Right. They wanted some things to change. They wanted Parliament to change some things. They wanted the king to use his power over Parliament. It wasn't until Tom Paine wrote a little pamphlet titled "Common Sense." Do we have some Paine up there? There it is, right there.
Common Sense, Rights of Man.
There's Tom Paine, and Washington. Talk about religious skeptics. Tom Paine was not only was he a skeptic about religion, he was an angry, hostile atheist. He thought all religions were just fraudulent attempts to pull the wool over people's eyes.
What year was Common Sense about?
Well, it was 76.
Oh, he wrote it in 76.
Yes.
Okay.
And George Washington reads it, and Tom Paine persuades George Washington. Talk about the influence of words and writing and rhetoric. Tom Paine persuades George Washington that justice for the Americans requires nothing less than full independence. No more fighting for a redress of grievances. No more trying to get the king to change something or Parliament to do something. We're done.
Okay.
Independence. And that starts this movement that culminates in the Declaration in 1776. Now, for all that to happen, though, and then think of what happens after. You have this. Once you decide on independence, you have to beat the British, which is no small matter, and that drags out for years, and it's terrible and bloody and horrible. And the British finally leave. Then what? What are we going to do now? We tried some Articles of Confederation. There were all kinds of problems. It was a huge question whether these colonists who became revolutionaries, gained their independence, whether they thought of themselves as citizens of one nation or as Virginians and South Carolinians and massive New Yorkers, and they thought of their state affiliation or allegiance. It was very unclear what was going to come next, and so all this is you have these indispensable roles. You absolutely need a kind of a badass like Sam Adams up there, right? I mean, in the nitty-gritty, sneaking onto British ships and dumping tea into the harbor because it's gonna encourage and energize a lot of those who are sort of sympathetic to revolution, but they're sitting on the fence. You need someone like a George Washington, who's one of the best biographies of him is titled "The Indispensable Man." Think of someone like Thomas Jefferson, who he's brilliant. Jefferson's brilliant. He has this very complicated personal life. He's a religious skeptic. He's the owner of a large plantation. He inherits large numbers of slaves. He's a slave dealer himself. He's buying and selling slaves. He's discovering these ideas of human equality. And he's a very quiet, reserved, sort of, I use a very old-fashioned word. He was sort of an effeminate man. He was not a manly man. He was kind of an effeminate, girly man. Oh, I'm probably going to catch all kinds of heck for that comment. Yeah. And there were moments where he showed less than courage. When the British invade Virginia, Jefferson runs. He runs. He doesn't pick up a gun and go fight. He runs.
Jefferson could be defined in a lot of ways as the 80s movie stereotypical nerd.
Yes.
Jefferson was the weakling,
yes,
the really nerdy, I just want to sit in the corner by myself and read. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to be very social. Don't expect me to come. If my friends get in a fight, I'm not going to go running into the fight now.
And literally, I'm not trying to just badmouth Jefferson. I mean, he was sick as a kid. He was sick all the time. He was never very large. He was never very strong. And so you need the mind of Jefferson and his poetry. I mean, he writes the Declaration of Independence, which becomes one of the best-known documents around the world. You need that, but men were not going to fight for Jefferson. They didn't have this loyalty and this allegiance to Jefferson the way that they did to Washington.
Right.
Washington was a physically imposing, towering, powerful. We think of Washington as this dorky old figure on the dollar bill, right? And then people talk about he had horse teeth and wooden teeth. And George Washington was the guy in the room nobody wanted to mess with.
Right.
No, he was physically intimidating, and he could back it up. He was a tough, bad dude, and he didn't run. He picked up arms and went after the enemy, and so he could attract the kind of loyalty and the allegiance that you need to make a continental army be able to push back against the British. At the same time, you need a Hamilton, you need a Madison. When it comes to writing a constitution, both James Madison and Alexander Hamilton gathered as many books as they could find, each independent of the other. And for about 6, 7, 8 months, they read everything they could get a hold of on the history of constitutions.
Right.
Ancient Greek constitutions, Roman constitutions, other constitutions, anything they could find. They wanted to see what has been tried and what tends to happen, with different kinds of constitutional designs. You need a John Adams. You need in the Constitutional Convention, even with George Washington there are moments where these delegates at the convention were breaking out into fistfights. Like they're yelling at each other and they're ready to punch each other. And you need an old figure like Ben Franklin there. Everyone revered Franklin. He was the older, elder, statesmanly type. Mm-hmm. He was the grandfatherly type, the wise grandfather. And when he stood up to speak, everyone got quiet. That was just the respectful thing to do. In many ways, Ben Franklin saved the Constitutional Convention from dissolving into chaos. And so it's this amazing, perfect team. You have all these pieces, all these characters, all these talents, and you need it all. And I remember thinking in 2003, where's the Iraqi version of a George Washington, a Thomas Jefferson, a Madison, a Hamilton, a Franklin, a John Adams, a Sam Adams, right? Where are all those types of people in Iraq and these other countries?
Yep. So here's the problem with the whole thing. We were going into Iraq and we were looking for the good people, the people who cared about others, the people who just wanted everybody to be happy and safe and everything else. And that's good. It's a good place to start. But you just talked about a lot of the things that some of these guys did that weren't so good. They were picking fights.
Yeah.
They were starting fights with each other.
Yeah.
They were popping each other in the nose and
Sam Adams was literally a brawler.
Right.
If you got him angry in a bar, chances were high he was going to just punch you in the nose.
And I still remember we have Ben Franklin's autobiography here, and I still remember one of the most profound sections of that book for me was when he talked about his evolution in terms of religion, where he started off very religious. He grew up in a very religious home.
Yep.
When he moved out of his brother's house, he said, "I'm done. This isn't for me. This is holding me back, or this isn't doing it for me." He gets to Pennsylvania. He sort of adopts it again, and he kind of goes back and forth throughout his life with religion.
In that way, very similar to Jefferson. Jefferson has this hot-cold relationship with Christianity throughout his life. There are moments where he praises Christianity. He congratulates Christianity as an organized religion for its cultural effects, its kind of softening of the manners and the mores of people in certain ways.
Right.
And then there are other moments where he's criticizing Christianity for being this bloodthirsty, tyrannical force in the world. One of the most famous things Jefferson did, he created his own version of the Bible. And he went through with a pair of scissors and he literally cut out every story of a miracle that included a miracle. And then he said, now what remains is a good book of morals, of moral teaching. He liked Jesus' teaching about how people should treat other people. He liked that. He loved the golden rule. But he thought all the stories and the miracles, this is just made up hokey pokey stuff.
So you have all of these things. And I think there's a point where we have to start discussing what makes somebody the right person for government. Just like we have the conversation, what makes somebody the right person to play third base for the New York Yankees?
Yep.
What makes them the right person to serve in government? And what are the standards we should hold them to? And how should we evaluate them? And how should we decide who to vote for?
Yeah.
Versus what are the things that we don't like? And we can talk about not liking them, but do we attack them for it? Do we push them out? Do we say we need to primary this person? We need to get rid of this person. They should not be in government.
Let's kind of start, if you wouldn't mind, Dave, kind of sketch out for us what you think Americans like today in terms of their politicians, whether it's candidates running for office or politicians in office.
Sure.
What makes politicians popular today? Is it their fidelity to the Constitution or the principles of the founding, or is it other things?
It's two things, I think, in particular. And one we've talked about before. People like people that they think are cool. Remember we did a podcast about this. It must have been 4 or 5 months ago.
Right.
But we did a podcast about that where we talked about people like to vote for the people they think are cool. And I remember I've heard people say, I don't understand. I asked people, I don't understand what you like about Barack Obama. He's not good. He's not doing good things for us as a people. He's hurting people. Yeah, but he's so cool.
Yeah.
Like that was the response. He's so cool. He's so much fun to.
I follow many progressives, just ordinary people I know on social media. And Obama was interviewed by Jay Leno. And these images from that interview, and Obama looked pretty cool. He had this well-tailored suit, white, collared shirt and no tie. He looked pretty cool. And there he is with David, and it wasn't Jay Leno, it was David Letterman who interviewed him.
I remember that.
And so there are all these, images, and the progressives are, and that's basically what they're saying. It was great. They were contrasting that with Trump. Remember how cool Barack Obama was.
But at the same time, go back 8 years before Obama, there were a lot of my friends. George Bush is cool. I want to sit in his. He probably has some man cave at his on the Texas ranch, where he's got this massive TV. I want to sit and watch a football game with George W. Bush. Drink a beer, hang out. I bet he's a lot of fun. That's the kind of guy I want to hang out with. Go back again. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, he eats McDonald's and he plays the saxophone and he's just a cool dude.
I actually forgot. I think he played saxophone on Saturday Night. Was it Saturday Night Live?
I think so.
I
think so. But wasn't he did it on stage at the DNC, I think, was the first time.
Right,
and that was like, everybody was like, oh my God. Like,
How cool.
How cool is this guy? He's a jazz musician and he eats McDonald's and he goes for runs in the park. And so people like to vote for the people they think are cool, the people they want to hang out with. and the people who they can relate to, or they aspire to. And when I say aspire to, I don't mean that in like the virtuous sense of the word, but man, I want to be more like Bill Clinton. I want to be more like Barack Obama. Barack Obama, people love. People want, and they look for people either they want to see themselves in, or they look for people that they do see themselves in. They've got this sense of like I'm really cool too.
Yeah.
And he's like me.
I'm going to sidetrack us just for a moment. What you just said really revealed to me something important. Think about, there are millionaires in the business world, successful business people, and there are millionaires in the political world. Now, there are some corrupt kind of crony types in the business world. That's how some of them became millionaires. They got some special deal with the government. But there are also many just creative, talented, entrepreneurial types. That's how they became millionaires. And yet we have many progressive Americans today look at them not in an aspirational way, not saying, oh, if that guy can be a successful millionaire business owner, I too. They look at them with anger and envy and resentment. That's not fair. Why does he get to be? He probably became a millionaire just by ripping people off. And so I want to increase his taxes, right? And take money away from him. But then when they turn their attention to the millionaires in the political class, the Clintons are millionaires. Not because they didn't invent an iPhone, or they didn't figure out how to make rockets come land back on Earth after they've been used like Elon Musk has, or nothing like that. It's been crony, inside trading and favoritism and those kinds of. That's how the Clintons became wealthy, and yet millions of Americans look at them in this aspirational way. I want to be more like that.
Right.
I think I've just defined one of our big goals at the Vino Veritas Society. When we know we've been successful, is when across the United States, people look up to and aspire to become like the successful entrepreneurs.
Sure.
And they say, I want to be like that. I want to do that too. And they sort of look with contempt and disdain at the chattering political class.
And there's a whole conversation. I almost brought it up. I'm just going to put it out there. And maybe we discuss it. Maybe we say just let it marinate with people. But there's a lot of us on both sides of the political aisle saying that person's too successful. Their company is too powerful. What they've done on their own. I mean, some of them got government help, and that's a big problem. But do we really want to break up companies just because somebody was successful? The answer to me is stop focusing so much on the fact that they're over here and they're successful and we need to break them up, and start focusing on, did we do things properly and they were successful in a proper scenario, or was it a bunch of cronyism that got them there?
Yeah.
Right? Did Amazon become so successful because they did everything properly, or was it because of a bunch of government tax breaks and incentives and the USPS, because it's government spending other people's money on other people? Right, that bottom quadrant of Milton Friedman's.
I'm going to mention a book here, and it might surprise some people. The author, yet it's a very thoughtful book. I highly recommend it. The author is Charles Koch, Koch, one of the Koch brothers of Koch Industries, which is based in my home state of Kansas. And his book, I believe the title is Good Profit, Bad Profit. I think profit as in making profit from a business, Profit, not religious profits.
Right.
And the basic argument he makes in the book, in a very thoughtful, serious way, and he trots out lots and lots of real-world examples. What he calls bad profit are businesses and individuals who become profitable and successful by using some kind of government favoritism. They get a regulation written that favors them and squeezes their competitors, or they get a subsidy or a contract that their competitors don't get, which allows them to offer some product which nobody else can compete with them. It's unfair. It's unjust. And Koch says that's a bad profit. That is immoral profit. But the good profit is when someone decides, makes the choice rather than sitting on the couch all day to get up and use their mind and use their labor and use their energy and produce something that other people really value.
Right.
And they do that a lot, and they do it well, and they make a lot of profit by providing tremendous value to other people. He said that's it's not only good profit, it's noble. It's beautiful. That is a praiseworthy thing. We should encourage more of that because it's win-win. Everybody wins in that scenario.
So let's go back to the bad profit for a minute. You introduced that as immoral. Mm-hmm. You asked me earlier, how do you define, how do people vote today?
Yeah.
And I gave you two things that I think more often than not they look for. Person believes in the same things I do. They're cool and they believe in the same things I do. I can relate to them. Mm-hmm. Now here's the question. What if that ability to relate was on a moral ground? Is it more important that you relate to somebody on the moral grounds of who they date, how they act in their private life, how they act at home? You know, you go back to Mickey Mantle, the example. I don't know how many people know this, but Mickey Mantle was out at the bars in New York City almost every single night.
Chasing a lot of girls.
Or do you go for the person who says, it's immoral for me to give a benefit to this company? It's immoral for me to take money from a foreign government
right,
and pass some law in the United States to control United States citizens, but my daughter Chelsea can have a $10 million wedding. Hint.
Right.
It wasn't so subtle.
Right.
But there's a real question of what is moral, mm-hmm. and what is that spectrum of morality, mm-hmm. and what is an immorality that we should be basing our decisions on, and what is an immorality that we should just say, I don't love that he's doing that
yep.
or she's doing that, but you know what? They're keeping me safe. They're following the proper purpose of government. We at least agree on the idea that there's a truth.
Right.
They want equality for all human beings. They want some pretty good things.
Right. Well, we need to add a level of complication to that already complicated subject, which is partisanship.
Sure.
Because partisanship plays in. I'm just going to throw out two examples in the way partisans flip on both sides. Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. When Bill Clinton was running for president, mm-hmm. progressive Democrats said, whatever he does in his private life in no way should be included in thinking about, electing him as president. His constitutional responsibilities as president are all that you should care about, not any private indiscretions he might have had. And at the very same time, conservative Republicans were saying character is everything. Whoever's going to be president has to have a really good character, has to exhibit self-restraint and all these qualities we talk about at the Vino Veritas Society. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're unfit. And therefore, right, their conclusion was Bill Clinton is unfit because he's out chasing all these girls, maybe harassing them or doing worse things. Clearly, he's not a self-restrained person. Fast forward to 2016, and partisans on both sides really did flip. Mm-hmm. Progressive Democrats are coming out saying, Trump didn't have a political record because he'd never been in politics before. So nobody, whether to use it to attack him or to boost him up, nobody could point to like a record, a voting record, right? He'd never been in office. So all there was his private life. And Democrats said, oh, look at all this philandering, and he's had multiple wives and girlfriends. He's immoral. He's not restrained. He's totally unfit to be president. They made the exact same argument that Republicans were making about Bill Clinton.
You talk about restrained. He tweets too much.
Yes.
And how many times?
Yes.
He tweets too much. He doesn't have any self-restraint because he tweets too much.
Yes. And then, to fill it out, many conservative Republicans, when it's in 2016, said, whatever he does in his private life, whatever his relationships have been with wives and his incessant tweeting and all these mm-hmm. compulsive things, that's not applicable to his duties as president of the United States. He should still be selected.
So So let's take that. And what if we talked about immorality in terms of proper purpose of government and the job of the president? Could have been a whole lot more consistent.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yes.
Right?
Well, not just the president, all members of government.
From presidents to bureaucrats to judges to everybody.
Yeah.
Do I care that Brett Kavanaugh drank beer in high school? Not really. Do I care that Brett Kavanaugh has already on occasion voted in a Supreme Court case something that's unconstitutional? He said, I don't find a constitutional problem with something that probably has.
Right.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head about, we've talked in a few podcasts about some of the decisions that have already come down since he became a member of SCOTUS. And there have been a few that have been questionable.
Right.
That's where we start to look at the immorality. You are hurting people that you have no business influencing their lives like that.
You know, maybe we can brand this concept. What really matters when it comes to the political class, judging, evaluate, which we all do, we should and we do, is not so much private morality but constitutional morality. Do they show a fidelity, a loyalty to the Constitution? A politician who says this is my constitutional job is to protect the liberty and property of citizens, and I'm going to do what I can using the constitutional powers delegated to me to make sure Americans are secure in their liberty and property, not to control their lives, not to centrally plan society, right? Not to take from some and give to others, but to make sure everybody all citizens are secure. That would be a moral politician. Now, that same politician, he might have 3 girlfriends.
Heaven forbid.
And the truth is, I don't really care. That same politician, in fact, I'll put a little more of an edge on here. That same politician who is voting for measures that protect liberty and property and voting against measures that violate liberty or restrict liberty, violate property rights. That same politician might make a body off-color joke. He might even make a joke that could be considered racist.
Yep.
He might make a joke among some friends and it somehow gets recorded about Catholics, Jews, gays, any group that's mocked on South Park.
Yeah.
Which is just about everybody, right? Scientology. I mean, South Park makes fun of anyone. There might be a politician who makes the kinds of jokes one finds on South Park, but is consistently protecting individual liberty and private property. And I would say I care more, far more, about his role in government protecting liberty and property than I do any offhand jokes. Maybe some of the jokes are rude. If a politician says something genuinely rude, I'll say, that was rude. That was rude. He shouldn't have said that. Or maybe he should apologize. But that matters very little.
Right.
I think many Americans today, millions of Americans, think that a racist joke is among the greatest injustices that can be committed.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it's not. In fact, it's nowhere close. Might be a little off-putting, might be rude, might be offensive to some, but a racist joke doesn't restrict anyone's liberty. It's not an exercise of government power to take property, private property from people. As long as citizens are free, there will be some people, including politicians, will freely say stupid jokes and rude comments and things like that.
Right. Well, so look, I mean, we have a war happening in the Middle East right now. They're not joking when Ilhan Omar and AOC and Rashida Tlaib make comments about Jews.
Yeah, you're right.
There's no joke about that. They're outright calling Jews horrible people. That's a bigger problem.
Well, and they're doing more, right? They're doing more. They're saying those things, and they're also voting to send my money and your money to active, violent enemies of the Israeli people. Terrorists, yeah.
Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
There's nobody in the world that denies that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
I'm going to borrow a line here, and I always like to give people credit. So this was our friend Ross Kaminsky was talking about this just the other day. And what he said was, it was perfect. He's been to Israel. He's spent a fair amount of time there. He's been to Gaza. And he was describing what it's like. And he said, these are very poor people. Gaza is a place of extreme poverty. And people live terribly there. And isn't it fascinating that among these terribly poor, hungry, starving people with very little health care, about the only things that they have are things that the Israelis built for them. But if the Israelis didn't build it for them, they're just living mired in poverty, and yet they've got rockets, and they have extensive networks of tunnels, which requires machinery and labor. And how is it that among these poor people, you're not finding masses of food and medicine, you're finding rockets and tools to dig tunnels? It's because to them, those terrorist, murderous attacks are more valuable. They're more important than feeding their own people. And how are they buying all these rockets and other weapons of terrorism? Some of it's being purchased with money that those progressive members of the United States Congress are voting to authorize.
And they're voting for, they're actually trying to create law that says we should go help. We should go participate.
Right.
We should go be active and attack Israel.
Right.
That is the type of immorality we need to be looking at.
And let's make this clear. Across the board, one of those Ilhan Omar might have 5 boyfriends. And she might be lying to some and cheating on others. And you know what? I really don't care. I really don't care.
Honestly, that is a perfect example. Ilhan Omar has supposedly married her brother.
That's right.
To get him citizenship in the United States.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Right.
I care that she's sending $145 million to a terrorist organization in the Middle East so that they can shoot 1,200 plus rockets at civilians in Israel.
Yep.
And I care that she's blocking the United States from supplying Israel with defense mechanisms to protect itself from those rockets.
And here I think we need to make a big point. When it comes to your private life and who you choose to be in your circle of friends, you should pay attention to people's character, to their habits, to their way of life, to their beliefs, to their conduct, all those things, to private indiscretions, whether they tend to tell the truth or tend to lie, whether they are fair in their dealings or they cheat, whether they're generous or stingy. You should care about those things when it comes to who's going to be your friends and who you're going to trust with, a key to your house and those kinds of things. When it comes to who should be in government, who should not, those private discretions or indiscretions are far from the most important thing, because government is a totally different animal. Government is not like any other organization. It's not like a group of friends. It's not even like a business. It's government, which is, we've said this before, and this is something that can never be repeated too often. Government is the only monopoly on legalized force. We can exercise force. We can walk down the street and hit someone. That's force. And the law is against us. The law, the government comes after us and arrests us and charges us with crimes. But when government uses force, when the FBI or the IRS sends a SWAT team of stormtroopers with military gear and armored trucks and knock down your door and come, right? That's legalized force. They're exercising the legal power of government, and they're backed up with cops and courts and jails and executioners. You and I have no legal authority to execute anybody. There's only, and neither does a business, neither does a church,
right.
No circle of friends does. Government does. Government has the legal authority to take someone's life, to execute them. And that means that this is this deadly, deadly power. And we should care greatly about how those in government use that power, far more than who they slept with last night.
Right. What you just said, if you or I, even if it's in self-defense, if we pull a gun and we murder somebody, if we use a knife and we murder somebody, even in self-defense, you and I are getting arrested. You and I are appearing in front of a judge. And that judge is going to determine, is a punishment warranted? And if so, what is that punishment? And was it truly, was your life in danger? All of those types of things. If a member of the FBI shoots somebody, they're going back to their office. They're filling out a form. There's nothing more to it. I mean, very
often that's true.
That is the definition of what you're talking about. I do want to go back. You were talking earlier about if a congressman is sleeping around and everything else, but not doing things right. And I want to tie this back to where we kind of started, and that is I was not so subtly referencing things like Facebook and Amazon earlier, talking about these companies who have benefited from government giveaways. And I want people to really think about what happens, what the string of dominoes really looks like. You help this company, they start to feel invincible. The government, helps these companies, and they start to grow and they start to improve. And they start to become very, very powerful.
Including things, right? Let's be clear, like Congress offered certain kinds of legal immunities to these companies.
Section 230 is a perfect example.
If you're Facebook and somebody writes a comment that is somehow libelous or something, Facebook can't be sued for that. Facebook isn't accountable for that under laws that Congress has created. That has allowed some of these tech companies to grow quite large.
And then all of a sudden, they get to start making decisions for your life. So this Congress, these group of people in Congress who helped them out, who gave them immunity, who gave them tax breaks, who gave them exemptions, they provided them the foundation to actually grow into what you don't like, what our members, what our friends, what the people we're having conversations with. It's what they don't like. It's what they want broken up. It's would they have ever gotten there without those benefits? Stop focusing so much on the benefits, on the we got to break them up and we've got to do that. Let's stop it from happening at the beginning. And to do that, it means starting to look at your congressmen, starting to look at your bureaucrats, starting to look at who you're voting for and who's holding legalized force over you in a different light. Yes, they might act immorally at home. They might do some things that you don't like. But if they're going to go create the Facebooks of the world, if they're going to enable the Facebooks of the world to a point where you're being silenced, that's a lot more immoral.
Well, here let me put it. I think in the sort of the opposite case is maybe more illuminating. The person who is, I don't know, sleeping with someone you don't think they should be sleeping with, or maybe just is rude and crude, unrefined, has a big mouth, is kind of a jerk, and devotes his energy into making sure you are protected in your liberty and your property. When he's on the clock, when he's voting for measures, he is consistently voting for measures that protect you and your individual liberty and your property. And he's rude and uncouth. You wouldn't point to him ever as a model for your kids to emulate. Which is more important, his voting record, what he's doing in office, or his rudeness and uncouthness, or who he slept with last night, or any other thing like that?
I would say a simple answer.
I think what matters, what I care about is what are they doing that's going to affect my liberty and my property?
So what do you say to the person who says, well, why can't we have both?
Well, that's great if you can find them.
That's the hard part.
Great if you can find them. But when we can't, here's the danger. When we can't find them, far too many Americans say, okay, we can't find them, so I'm going to care more about their personality. Their personality. And so a Joe Biden seems polite compared to Trump. He seems polite and, more civilized. And I think that's putting the priority on exactly the wrong thing.
And even to a certain extent, people would say AOC is more polite than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Joe Biden.
She might be. I don't know. I don't know her personally.
Joe Biden has it's questionable about how much control he actually has over the administration.
Here, I'll say this just to illustrate the point. I'm going to assert, I don't know that this is true. I don't know Miss Ocasio-Cortez. So I'm going to make some assumptions. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, she's very polite. Mm-hmm. She's very well-mannered. She's graceful. She's a pleasant conversationalist. She listens when you talk, and she responds thoughtfully, and she doesn't have, she's not foul-mouthed or she doesn't turn to invective or ugly kind of language. And she's just a gentle soul in the way she interacts with others. And she is a deeply immoral person, a deeply, deeply constitutionally immoral human being because of what she does in Congress.
Right.
She consistently supports measures that restrict other people's liberty, violates and confiscates and controls other people's property that does not belong to her. And yet she wants control over other people's lives and property. That's deeply immoral, even though she might be this very graceful, elegant, well-spoken person in private conversations.
And it goes back to the question you asked me earlier of what do people look for when they vote? Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of people out there who say, I was a bartender. I know what it's like to work in the service industry. I know what she's had to put up with, and I do.
Right.
I've visited enough bars. I've worked in restaurants. I know how awful some restaurant patrons are.
Yep.
She's had to put up with a lot, and she's probably had to develop some thick skin because of it.
Well, and what that means is, that would make for an interesting conversation about the life of a bartender.
Yep.
That doesn't mean she has any business controlling other people's lives and taking other people's property. It means she probably has some interesting stories to talk about how tough it is working as a bartender.
So I guess our call to the guardians of the Vino Veritas Society, if you're going to guard the American idea, if you're going to guard us from those in Congress who are supposed to be the guardians, stop worrying so much about people's private lives and start first focusing on, are they constitutionally moral?
Yep. Is there a fidelity, a loyalty to the Constitution? That should be, if the answer is yes, or even mostly yes, most of the time. I think that's about as good as we can get in modern progressive America. Members of Congress and other politicians who are constitutional, they vote in constitutional ways most of the time, or much of the time. That's a pretty good start. And that check mark of yes should count more than any check mark in their private lives.
It always goes back to Aristotle at the end, right? We're not always angels, and we're not always beasts. We're somewhere in the middle.
I want to throw in. I know we're wrapping things down, but I want to throw out a kind of a famous example that many people don't know. When I think of rowdy, bawdy, unrestrained, even kind of violent members of the political class, what example comes to my mind? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. Everyone thinks of old Abe as this distinguished, delivering the Gettysburg Address or something like that. You know what the first political thing Abraham Lincoln did as a young man?
I love this story.
Picked a fight.
Yes.
Picked a fist fight. When he moved to New Salem in Illinois, there was a local, it was a tiny, dusty little town on the prairie. And there was a gang. It was a gang of young guys, 18, 19 years old. Mm-hmm. And they would get drunk and they would shake people down, steal money, beat people up they didn't like. They were just this group of ruffians, and everyone was kind of scared of them. It's kind of, there's a great old Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Yeah. And this group was kind of like Liberty Valance and his group. And so Abe went to them and he challenged the head guy, the leader of the gang, to a fight, and he beat him. and after that, he won the friendship and the loyalty and the support of that whole gang. And several years later, when Lincoln ran for the state legislature the first time, those guys were out nailing up posters promoting Abraham Lincoln.
We'll do a little, as we wrap up, we'll do a little shout out to a friend of the Vino Veritas Society, your old friend Chris Flannery, who has a great podcast can find it on iTunes.
Yeah.
And he actually did a short episode telling that story.
Oh, I have not. I have to go hear that.
You haven't heard that?
I have not heard that.
That is my favorite podcast that he's done.
Okay.
Chris Flannery did one on that whole story.
Yeah.
And you and I know what kind of storyteller Chris Flannery is. He's very low key. He's very, very smooth in his delivery.
Chris Flannery is, for those who don't know, I hope he hears this someday. Chris Flannery is the James Bond of political philosophers. He's just cool.
But you sit there and he tells a story, and I can just envision the entire thing, and it makes you realize Abe Lincoln had a little bit more George Washington in him than he had Thomas Jefferson in him.
Yes.
What made Abe Lincoln unique is he had a little bit of both. And that made him pretty special.
That's a great point.
So maybe we need.
So the point is, right? Don't cast away. Don't think, oh, someone who's not perfectly refined and smooth and cultured and polite. They might be the absolute necessary person you need at that moment in that time.
And Abe Lincoln would fight, but we hear stories. So when somebody comes up to you and says, yeah, but he and Mary Todd didn't have a great relationship.
It's true.
You know what? Abe Lincoln freed millions of slaves.
That's right.
That's a pretty damn good guy.
His wife, on at least one occasion that we know of, hit him in the head with a burning log from the fireplace. And he went running out the door, yelling with his hair smoldering with embers. Their relationship was rocky and at times violent, and it was anything from a model marriage. And yet, looking back, who would have said, "Well, we can't vote for Lincoln because he doesn't have a perfect home life"? No, he doesn't. But he's the guy we need right now.
Imagine if we canceled Abraham Lincoln, where the world would be today. So with that. Let's focus on constitutional morality.
Yep.
Let's focus on adherence to the Declaration of Independence, the ideas, the precepts and virtues. If you want to know how to define what's constitutionally virtuous, go back to the virtues and the precepts of the Vino Veritas
Let's guard
Society.
those principles by supporting those who are willing to stand up for them and act accordingly.
And let's encourage our friends to do the same.
Yep.
And with that, we'll say Nos Somos Custodes.
Till next time.